Captain Minjung refused to leave. The shuttle was ready, and the children were safe, but she stood at the airlock and stared at the sealed corridor where Yira had trapped herself with the void. Reaper's Jihoon was already pulling out his cutting tools. Before she gave the order, Torvin used his 3 arms to brace the emergency bulkhead while Santos monitored the station's failing life support systems through the reinforced glass they could see. Yira's light blazing in the darkness like a star. Being born, the Void Reapers surrounded her, but something strange was happening. They were not attacking. Instead, they were twitching and shaking as if some invisible force was disrupting their system. Sira had discovered something that no one else knew about her bioluminescence. When she pushed it to maximum intensity, the light patterns interfered with the Reaper's sensory networks. They could not process the signal she was broadcasting, and their hunting instincts became confused and disoriented. She was holding them back with nothing but her own body. The same biology that the Dominion had called defective was now the only thing standing between the monsters and the people she had come to savage. Jihoon cut through the secondary bulkhead in 7 minutes. Flatted was the fastest work he had ever done, and his hands were shaking when he finished. Mingyang pushed through the opening first and found Yira collapsed on the floor, surrounded by deactivated Reaper husks. The parasites had burned out their own systems trying to process her light signal. They lay scattered around her like broken machines that had finally stopped running, but Yira was barely alive. Her bioluminescence had faded to almost nothing, and her translucent skin looked gray. And lifeless. Santos reached her first and immediately began emergency treatment while Minjung held Yira's cold hand and whispered words that no one else could hear. They carried her back to the persistent dawn. Just as the Dominion fleet finally arrived, the great warships of the Collective filled the viewport with their imposing presence, but they were too late to save anyone. The humans and the rejected beings had already done what the mighty Dominion could not. Yira woke 3 days later in the medical bay of the persistent dawn. Santos had not slept since the rescue, and his gentle face was lined with exhaustion, but he smiled when he saw her eyes open. Captain Minjung was there too, sitting in a chair beside the bed with her hand still holding Yira's. The grief that Yira had always sensed in the captain was still present, but something had shifted. There was hope there now. Hope and pride in something that felt like family. Minjung said that Yira had scared her badly. She said that she had already lost one daughter, and that she could not bear to lose another. Yira felt tears forming in her eyes, and her bioluminescence flickered weakly in response. She said that she was sorry for frightening the captain. She said that she had not known if her plan would work, but that she could not let the children die. Minjung squeezed her hand and said that she understood. She said that this was exactly what made Yira worthy of being part of this crew, not her ability to sense emotions, not her usefulness in negotiations, but her willingness to sacrifice everything for people who needed help. That was what the humans called courage. That was what made someone truly valuable. A week later, the persistent dawn received a formal request from Director Veiliv, asked to come aboard and speak with the crew in person. Minjung granted the request and gathered everyone in the cargo bay to receive him. Veiliv arrived alone and without guards. He looked different than he had on the view screen, smaller. Somehow, and humbled by everything that had happened, he walked directly to Yira and stopped in front of her. Then he did something that no Dominion had ever done before. He knelt. His voice was thick with emotion. As he spoke, he said that the Dominion Collective formally rescinded the defect classification for the entire Vela species. He said that they had been wrong about her people for 300 years. The Velas were not failures. The Dominion was the failure for being unable to see what the Veleth truly were. He apologized on behalf of his entire civilization and asked if Yira could ever forgive them. Yira looked down at him for a long moment and felt the sincerity of his words through her ability. He meant every syllable. The arrogant director who had refused human help was now kneeling before a being he once considered defective. She told him that she accepted his apology, but that forgiveness would take time. She told him that the Velith had suffered for generations because of the Dominion's judgment, that suffering could not be erased with words alone. But this was a beginning. Velith nodded and rose to his feet, offered Yura a place in Dominion space with full citizenship and all the rights that came with it. They said that she could return to her people as a hero and help rebuild what the Dominion had broken. Yura smiled and shook her head. She said that she already had a home, she already had a family, a human had seen her worth when the entire collective could not, and she would not abandon that human. Now Velith bowed his head in acceptance and departed without another word. The news of the rescue spread across the galaxy in the following weeks. A Velith had saved Dominion children from Void Reapers. A human crew had risked everything for people who had scorned them. The thrown away and the overlooked had proven themselves. Harosayera received messages from Velith across known space, thanking her for what she had done. Some of them said that they had given up hope long ago, but that her actions had rekindled something they thought was dead. She had shown them that worth was not determined by ancient judgments. Worth was proven through actions, and anyone could become valuable if they refused to accept the limits that others placed on them. The persistent Dawn departed the Dominion sector on a quiet morning. Sickly Era stood at the observation window beside Captain Minjung and watched the stars drift past. The other rejected beings gathered around them one by one. Torvin, with his criminal brand that no longer shamed him. Grandmother Os, with her ancient wisdom that was finally being heard. Prism, with their crystalline light that the humans had learned to understand. Jihun and Chen Wei and Santas, and the Yuna family built from discarded pieces that the galaxy had thrown away. Minjung asked where they should go next. Ira let her bioluminescence glow warm and steady. Her light was brighter now than it had ever been, not because she had changed, but because she finally understood what she had always been. She said that they should go wherever someone needed them, wherever someone needed to be seen. The captain smiled and gave the order to jump. The persistent Dawn accelerated into the light, carrying its crew of the unwanted toward a galaxy that was only beginning to understand what humans had always known, that worth is not measured by what you were made, for worth is measured by what you choose to become. And sometimes the most valuable beings in the universe are the ones that everyone else has thrown away. The Dominion research station was dying when the persistent Dawn arrived. Void Reapers had attached themselves to the outer hull and were eating their way toward the living sections where 47 researchers huddled in Fury Era had heard stories about Void Reapers, but she had never seen them in person. They were mindless biomechanical parasites that drifted through space, consuming any organic matter they encountered. Once they latched onto a station or ship, they would not stop until everything living had been devoured. The Dominion had sent a distress call to their own fleet, but the nearest ships were still 12 hours away. 12 hours was far too long. The Reapers would breach the intersections within 2 hours at most. Captain Minjung hailed the station and offered assistance, but the response she received was cold and hostile. Director Velith was the Dominion commander in charge of the station, and he appeared on the view screen with contempt in his eyes. He said that Dominion stations did not accept help from unregulated human primitives. He said that his people would wait for proper Dominion rescue and that the humans should continue on their insignificant way. Yura could sense the fear beneath his arrogance. Velith was terrified, but he would rather die than accept help from beings he considered inferior. Minjung stayed calm and asked if there were children on the station. Velith hesitated for just a moment before admitting that the station housed a creche of 12 Dominion young. They were the children of the researchers, and they were currently sheltered in the innermost section of the station. Minjung said that the humans would be standing by if the director changed his mind. Then she cut the transmission and turned to her crew. She said that they would wait. She said that pride was a powerful thing, but survival was more powerful. And When the Dominion asked for help, the persistent Dawn would be ready. The crew prepared for a rescue mission while Yura watched. The station on the sensors, she could see the Void Reapers crawling across the hull like a living infection, and she could see the damage spreading hour by hour. Prism monitored the structural integrity and reported that the intersections would be breached in 90 minutes. Still, the Dominion refused to call 80 minutes, 70 minutes, 60 minutes. Then the transmission came. Director Valeth appeared on the view screen again, and his arrogance had crumbled into desperate fear. The Reapers had breached the outer research labs, and 3 of his people were already dead. He was begging now. He said that he would accept any help the humans could offer, and that he was sorry for his earlier words. Minjung did not waste time on pride or revenge. She simply asked for the station schematics and began coordinating the rescue. The problem was that the station's corridors were flooded with a bioluminescent tracking agent that the Dominion used for security purposes. The agent interfered with most species sensors and made navigation nearly impossible. Anyone who tried to search for survivors would be effectively blind. Yura stepped forward and said that she could see through the interference. Her Velith biology processed bioluminescence differently than other species, and the tracking agent would not affect her vision. In fact, it would make navigation easier, because she could follow the light patterns to locate living beings throughout the station. Minjong looked at her with concern and asked if she was certain the station was crawling with Void Reapers, and one mistake could mean death. Era let her light blaze bright and said that she was certain this was what she was made for. Dominion called her biology defective, but today that defect would save Dominion lives. The rescue team consisted of Yura, along with Jihoon and Torvin and Santos. They crossed to the station in a small shuttle and entered through an emergency airlock that Prism had identified as still functional. The corridors were dark and filled with swirling bioluminescent particles that would have blinded anyone else, but Yura could see clearly. She led the team through the damaged sections, calling out directions and warnings as they moved. Jihoon sealed breaches behind them to slow the Reaper advance. Torvin used his 3 arms to carry wounded researchers to safety. Santos provided medical care to anyone who needed it. They found survivors hiding in sealed rooms throughout the station. Some were injured and some were in shock, but all of them stared at Yura with confusion when they saw what she was: a Velith leading a rescue team, a defect saving Dominion lives. Yura did not stop to explain. There would be time for that later if they survived. The creche was located in the deepest section of the station, and that was where Yura led the team next. When they broke through the sealed door, they found 12 Dominion children huddled together in the dark. They were young enough that they did not understand what was happening. They only knew that the monsters were coming and that they were afraid. Yura knelt down and let her light glow soft and warm. She spoke gently and told them that she was here to take them somewhere safe. One of the children reached out and touched her glowing skin with wonder in his eyes. He asked if she was an angel. Yura did not know what to say, so she just smiled and said that she was. A friend. Director Valeth arrived at the creche just as the team was preparing to evacuate the children. Stared at Yura with an expression that she could not read at first. Then he spoke in a voice that was heavy with confusion. Asked why Veleth was helping them. He said that the Dominion had discarded her kind and that she owed them nothing. Yura stood up and faced him with her light steady and bright. She said that he was right. She owed the Dominion nothing. But these children had not discarded anyone, and they deserved to be saved regardless of what their ancestors had done. She said that the humans had taught her that worth was not something given by others. Worth was something shown through actions. Then she turned back to the children and continued the evacuation. The team had almost reached the shuttle when the Void Reapers broke through the final barrier. They came pouring into the corridor like a wave of grinding metal and hungry mouths. There was no time to run. Someone had to hold them back long enough for the children to reach safety. Yura made her choice without hesitation. She told Ji-hoon to take the others and get to the shuttle. Then she ran toward a side corridor and began to flash her bioluminescence in bright patterns designed to attract the Reaper's attention. The parasites had sensors that tracked organic signatures, and Yura's glowing biology was like a beacon in the darkness. They turned away from the fleeing children and surged toward her. Instead, Yura sealed the corridor door behind her and found herself alone with the monsters through the reinforced glass. She could see Minjung's face staring at her from the shuttle airlock. The captain was shouting something, but Yura could not hear the words. She could feel the emotion, though, grief and pride and love. The love of a captain for her crew. The love of a mother who had lost one daughter and refused to lose another. Ira smiled and let her light blaze brighter than it had ever been before then. She turned to face the Void Reapers as they closed in around her. 3 months passed and Yura learned what it meant to have a family. The persistent dawn traveled trade routes that larger corporations ignored and served small colonies and stations that could not afford. PREMIUM shipping captain Minjung said that the forgotten places needed help the most, and that someone had to remember them. The work was hard, but honest, and Yura found that she loved every moment of it. Their quarters had been modified by Ji-hoon to maintain the atmospheric conditions that her Velith biology required. He had worked on the modifications for 3 days without complaint, and when Yura tried to thank him, he just shrugged and said the crew takes care of crew. This phrase had become something like a prayer on the persistent dawn. Whenever someone needed help or support, or just a kind word, the others would say, "Crew takes care of crew." Yura had never experienced anything like it before. She worked alongside the other crew members and learned their rhythms and their habits and their ways. Shan Wei taught her how to read star charts and navigate the ship during quiet night watches. Santos taught her human card games that made no logical sense, but were somehow fun anyway. Kim Do-yoon shared music from Earth with her, seemed delighted when she said that she liked the slow, sad songs best, and the other rejected beings found their places. Tutorvin used his 3 arms to load and unload cargo faster than anyone else on the ship. Grandmother Os kept perfect inventory records and noticed small details that everyone else missed. Prism monitored the sensors with crystalline precision and learned to communicate with the humans through a combination of light patterns and simple gestures. They were all outcasts and failures according to the galaxy, but on the persistent dawn, they were familiar. Proved her worth during a tense negotiation at a border station. 3 weeks into her service, a Deshan merchant tried to sell the crew counterfeit fuel cells that would have caused a catastrophic engine failure. Yura sensed his deception the moment he began speaking, and she signaled Captain Minjung with a subtle light pattern they had developed together. The captain trusted her completely and walked away from the deal without hesitation. Later she thanked Yura for saving the ship, and Yura felt her light blaze with pride. She was not defective, she was valuable. Her ability was not a curse, but a gift, and the humans had been the first to see it. One evening after a long day of deliveries, Yura found Captain Minjung sitting alone in the observation deck staring out at the stars. The captain often came here when she needed to think, and usually she preferred to be alone, but something made Yura walk closer and sit down beside her. She asked about the grief that she had sensed during their first meeting. She said that she did not mean to pry, but that she could feel the weight of loss that the captain carried everywhere she went. Minjung was quiet for a long time, and Yura worried that she had made a mistake. Then the captain began to speak in a voice that was soft and heavy with memory. She said that she had a daughter once, a bright and beautiful girl named Isio Yuna, who loved the stars as much as her mother did. They lived on a small colony on the edge of human space, and Yuna dreamed of becoming a pilot and exploring the galaxy. Then a plague came to the colony. It spread fast and killed faster, and the colony begged the larger galactic powers for help. The medicine existed, and the cure was known, but the powers decided that the colony was too small and too poor to be worth saving. They said it was economically insignificant. Yuna died in her mother's arms, while Minjung screamed for help. That never came. The captain stopped speaking, and Yura saw tears running down her weathered face. Yura did not know what to say, so she simply sat beside the captain and let her light glow warm and steady. Sometimes presence was more valuable than words. After while Minjung wiped her eyes and continued speaking, she said that after Yuna died, she sold everything she owned and bought the persistent dawn. She said that she would spend the rest of her life serving the places that the galaxy forgot. She would never let anyone feel as alone and abandoned as her daughter had felt in those final days. This was why she collected the rejected beings. This was why she saw value where others saw garbage, because Minjung knew what it felt like to be thrown away. And she refused to let anyone else carry that weight. Yura reached out and took the captain's hand and held it gently. She said that Minjung had saved her life at the labor exchange. She said that she had been ready to give up and disappear into the void, but the captain had given her something to live for. Minjung squeezed her hand and said that Yura had saved herself. All the captain did was give her a chance to shine. They sat together in comfortable silence and watched the stars drift past the observation window. Yura thought about what she had learned since joining this. Cool humans were strange and wonderful, and completely unlike anything the galaxy expected. They were young and small and supposedly insignificant, but they refused to accept that judgment. They kept pushing and caring and fighting for things that older species had given up on. All ago, the Velith had been abandoned by their creators and taught to believe they were worthless. But humans saw worth where others saw defects. They saw potential where others saw failure. Maybe that was the most human thing of all. The next morning, the ship received a distress signal from a remote research station. The signal was weak and desperate and carried the identification codes of the Dominion Collective. Era felt her light flicker when she heard the name. The Dominion was the power that had created her species and then thrown them away. They were the ones who had branded the Velith as defective and condemned them to lives of rejection and shame. Captain Minjung looked at Yura with serious eyes and said that the choice was hers. They did not have to answer the distress call if Yura did not want to help the people who had hurt her. Yura thought about everything she had learned in the past 3 months. She thought about crew takes care of crew and about seeing value in the thrown away. She thought about Minjung's daughter dying alone while the powerful refused to help. Then she let her light blaze bright and spoke clearly. She said that the Dominion had abandoned the Velith, but that did not mean the Velith had to become like them. She said that they should answer the call because that was who they were. Minjung smiled with pride and gave the order to change course, and the persistent dawn turned toward the distress signal, carrying a crew of outcasts toward an enemy that was about to learn what it meant to be saved by the people they had thrown away. Yura stood in the labor exchange hall for the 47th day and watched another employer walk away from her without a single word. The Craxian mining foreman had not even looked at her face before he laughed and moved to the next applicant in line. She was used to this by now, but the pain never became easier to carry. Her species was called the Velith, and across the entire galaxy, they were known as the greatest failure in genetic engineering history. The Minion Collective had created them 3 centuries ago as living data processors and organic computers that could feel the emotional truth behind any interaction, but the project was declared unsuccessful and the Dominion abandoned the entire Velith species like broken machinery. Thrown into the void, now every Velith carried that shame in their official records. Defect class was stamped next to their species name in every database across known space era. Looked down at her hands and saw the soft glow beneath her translucent skin flickering weak and dim. The Velith had bioluminescence running through their bodies, and that light responded to their emotions in ways they could not hide. Right now, her light was fading because her hope was fading with it. She had 18 days left before station security would remove her from Theta 9 for inability to pay her residency fees after that she did not know where she would go or what she would. Duodecian merchant caravan had told her yesterday that her kind brought bad luck to any ship that carried Thema. Mordith military recruiter had laughed and said she would not survive a single rotation in real work. The worst part was that Yura could feel their emotions when they rejected her. Her ability let her sense the truth behind every interaction, and she knew that most of them felt nothing when they looked at her. She was not even worth their disgust or their hatred. She was simply nothing to Thema, a piece of garbage that the galaxy had already thrown away. Long before she was born, Yura found an empty bench near the back of the hall and sat down to rest her tired legs. She had been standing since the station lights came on at morning cycle, and now the lights were dimming toward evening all around her. The labor exchange buzzed with activity as species from 100 different worlds made deals and signed contracts and found places where they belonged. She belonged nowhere. The great windows of the station showed the endless black of space dotted with distant stars, and Yura wondered if there was a single place among all those lights where someone like her could matter. Loud announcement echoed through the hall, and Yura almost did not listen because announcements never concerned her. But then she heard the words, and something made her pay attention. A human trade vessel called the Persistent. Dawn had just docked at Base 7, and the captain was posting a job listing for new crew members. Yura had heard of humans before, but she had never met one in person. They were a young species from a small planet on the edge of explored space, and most galactic powers considered them primitive and unimportant. Some called them reckless, and others called them stubborn. But everyone agreed that humans were strange in ways that older species could not understand. The announcement said that the job listing had only one requirement: all species welcome and no questions asked. Yura sat very still on her bench and felt something dangerous stirring in her chest. It felt like hope, and she had learned to fear that feeling because hope always led to more pain. 18 days was not very long, and she had nothing left to lose. She stood up from the bench and walked toward Docking Bay 7 with her dim light flickering beneath her skin. Corridors of the station were crowded with beings of every shape and size. But Yura had learned to move through crowds without being noticed. Most species looked right through her as if she were invisible, and sometimes that invisibility was the only protection she had. When she reached Base 7, she found a small line of applicants waiting outside a battered cargo ship that looked like it had seen better centuries. The ship was covered in scorch marks and patched hull plates, but someone had painted the name Persistent Dawn across the side in bright yellow letters that refused to be ignored. Yura took her place at the end of the line and looked at the other applicants. There was a 3-armed Keth with a criminal brand burned into his face, and an elderly Foshan, whose species was considered too slow for modern work. A mute crystalline stood near the front of the line, and Yura knew that most species refused to accommodate their unique method of communication. These were all rejected beings just like her, thrown away, and the unwanted gathered together by a single job posting that promised to ask no questions. One by one, the applicants went inside the ship, and one by one they came back out with expressions that Yura could not read. None of them looked angry or humiliated the way applicants usually looked after being rejected. They looked confused, as if something had happened that they did not expect. When Yura's turn finally came, she walked up the boarding ramp with her heart beating fast in her chest. The interior of the ship was cramped but clean and filled with strange objects that she did not recognize. Human things she realized: photographs and plants, and colorful fabrics that served no obvious purpose except to make the space feel like someone's home. A woman sat behind a small desk covered in datapads and cargo manifests, and she looked up when Yura entered. This was Captain Seo Minjung, and she was the first human that Yura had ever seen up close. The captain had gray-streaked black Hair pulled back from a weathered face, and burn scars ran along her left arm in patterns that spoke of old pain. Her eyes were dark and deep, and when she looked at Yura, those eyes actually saw her. Not through her and not past her, but directly at her, as if Yura were a real person worthy of attention. That simple act of being seen made Yura's light flicker brighter for just a moment before she could control it. The captain noticed and tilted her head with what looked like curiosity rather than disgust. She asked Yura why her light was so dim, and the question was so unexpected that Yura did not know how to answer at first. No one had ever asked about her light before. No one had ever cared enough to notice that it was fading. Opened her mouth to give some excuse, but instead the truth came out before she could stop. And she said that her light was dim because her hope was dim, and her hope was dim because the galaxy had decided long ago that she was worthless. The captain listened without interrupting, and Yura felt something strange happening inside her own ability. She could sense the emotional truth behind every interaction, and what she sensed from this human was almost impossible to believe. There was grief in the captain and loss so deep that it seemed like an ocean without a bottom. But there was no deception at all. This human meant every word she said and felt every question she asked. When Yura finished speaking, the captain leaned forward with interest in her eyes and asked a question that would change everything. She asked what Yura could do and what Yura loved doing. And for the first time in 47 days, Yura began to believe that someone might actually want to hear her answer. Yura had never spoken about her ability to anyone who actually wanted to listen. Most species were disturbed by the idea that someone could sense their emotional truth, and they treated her like a threat to be avoided. But Captain Seo Minjung leaned forward with genuine curiosity and waited for Yura to explain. So Yura told her everything. She explained that the Velith were created to read emotional resonance fields and to perceive the truth behind any interaction. She could tell when someone was lying, and she could feel when someone meant what they said. She could sense fear and anger and joy and sorrow as clearly as other species could see colors or hear sounds. The ability was supposed to make the Velith perfect negotiators and diplomats. But the Dominion Collective decided that it was too unpredictable and too difficult to control, so they labeled the entire species as defective and walked away. Yura waited for the captain to become uncomfortable or to make an excuse to end the conversation. Instead, the human woman smiled and asked if Yura could tell when someone was trying to cheat her during trade negotiations. I nodded and said that she could sense deception as easily as breathing. The captain sat back in her chair and said 5 words that Yura would remember for the rest of her life. She said that is not a defect. Yura felt her light surge brighter beneath her skin, and she could not stop it from happening. The captain noticed, and her smile grew wider and warmer. She offered Yura a position on the Persistent Dawn as the ship's communications specialist. The title sounded official and important, and it gave Yura's rejected ability a name that carried respect instead of Shamahira, accepted before she could talk herself out of it, and the captain shook her hand in a human gesture of agreement. The touch was warm and solid and real in a way that Yura had not felt in a very long time. Before Yura could leave, the captain called in the other applicants who had been waiting. The Nonsin Keth with the criminal brand came first, and Yura learned that his name was Torvin, and that he had been branded for stealing food to feed his family during a famine. The captain hired him as cargo handler without asking about his crime. The elderly Fashion was named Grandmother Os, and her species lived for thousands of years, but worked at a pace that other species found unbearably slow. The captain hired her as inventory manager because she said that careful work was more valuable than fast work. The mute crystalline was called Prism, and they communicated through patterns of refracted light that most species refused to learn. The Bia captain hired them as sensor technician and promised that her crew would learn to understand their language. Watched all of this with growing wonder and finally asked the captain why she was hiring beings that everyone else had rejected. Captain was quiet for a moment, and then she spoke in a voice that carried the weight of hard experience. She said that the galaxy throws away what it does not understand. She said that she had found that the thrown away things are often the most valuable. Then she led them all into the ship to meet the rest of the crew. There were 4 other humans on the Persistent. Dawn and they greeted the new arrivals with friendly words and curious eyes. Engineer Park Ji-hoon was a young man with quick hands and a quicker smile, who immediately started asking Prism questions about their crystalline biology. Pilot Chen Wei was a tall woman with steady eyes, who nodded at Grandmother Oz with what looked like genuine respect for her age. Medic Santis was a gentleman with a soft voice, who checked on Torvin's branded scars and offered to treat them if they caused pain. Navigator Kim Do-hyun was the youngest of the crew, and he looked at Yura's glowing skin with amazement rather than fear. These humans were strange in ways that Yura did not understand. They asked questions because they wanted to learn, and not because they wanted to judge. They offered help because they wanted to help, and not because they expected something in return. Yura could sense the emotional truth behind every interaction, and what she sensed from these humans was almost overwhelming. They actually cared about the beings they had just met. They actually wanted their new crew members to feel welcome and safe. This was so different from everything Yura had experienced that she did not know how to process it. Captain Minjung showed Yura to her quarters and explained that Ji-hoon would modify the room to maintain the atmospheric conditions that Velith needed to stay healthy. Yura said that the modifications might be complicated and expensive, and that she did not want to be a burden. The captain stopped walking and turned to face her with serious eyes. She said that taking care of crew was not a burden, and that Yura needed to stop thinking of herself as a problem to be solved. She said that Yura was part of this ship now, and that the ship took care of its own. Then she left Yura alone to settle into her new home. Era stood in the small room and felt tears forming in her eyes for the first time in years. The Pisti Velith did not cry often, but when they did, their tears glowed with the same bioluminescence that ran through their bodies. She watched the glowing drops fall onto her hands and realized that she was crying because she was happy. She had forgotten what happiness felt like. That night the crew gathered in the common room to share a meal together, and Yura sat among them feeling like she was dreaming. The humans laughed and talked and told stories about their adventures across the galaxy, and they made sure to include the new crew members in every conversation. Torn slowly relaxed as he realized that no one was going to judge him for his grandmother. Oz smiled her ancient smile as Shinwei asked her questions about the history she had. Witness Prism flickered with colorful light as Ji-hoon successfully interpreted one of their jokes, and Yura sat quietly and let herself feel the warmth of belonging for the first time in her life. When the meal was over and the crew began to drift toward their quarters, Captain Minjung stopped beside Yura and spoke softly. She said that the galaxy was full of beings who had been told they were worthless, and she said that most of them believed it because no one had ever told them different. She said that humans were considered worthless, once too young and primitive, and too small to matter in a galaxy ruled by ancient powers. But humans refused to believe that judgment, and they kept pushing forward until the galaxy had no choice but to notice them. She said that Yura could refuse to believe the judgment that the galaxy had placed on her. She said that worth was not something given by others, but something proven through actions. Then she wished Yura good night and walked away. Yura returned to her quarters and lay down on her bunk and stared at the ceiling as the ship hummed around. Her light was brighter now than it had been in months, and she could feel hope building in her chest again. This time she did not try to push it away. She let herself hope, and she let herself believe that maybe she had finally found a place where she could matter. Outside her small window, the stars stretched endless and bright across the void, and somewhere among those stars, the Persistent Dawn was carrying her toward a future she had never dared to imagine.